Welcome to Signals and Stories.
I'm Kelly Miller.
And I'm Robin LeGassicke.
This is the podcast where we unpack the signals that are shaping our industry and the stories that are shaping us. We're going to do a deep dive into a topic in Landscape Pulse, talk it through just the two of us, interview a guest who's a specialist in the area, and wrap things up with hot takes or headache.
And today we're going to be tackling a slightly different topic than usual. Cognitive capacity and executive function. And don't worry if you don't know what that is, because our goal today is to change that. Because while the world keeps speeding up, the brain hasn't exactly received a software update. We have more technology, more information, more productivity tools than ever before. So why do so many smart and capable people feel so overwhelmed?
It really does feel like we're in a time of abundance of information overload. There's more meetings, more messages. I know I have more red dot notifications than ever before, more ways of communicating, and also more productivity tools on top of it. And with all of this technology that's been advanced and come out, it does feel like people are more overwhelmed, more exhausted, and more distracted than ever before.
Mhm. So, what happens when the demands of the modern work start to exceed our capacity to process it all? And how do leaders build teams that can think clearly, can prioritize effectively, and perform sustainably in environments that never seem to slow down?
It's a great point. And I think to help us unpack this, we're joined today by Jamila Godfrey. She's the founder of Village of Play, and that's helping professionals build cognitive capacity, strengthen executive functioning skills, and think more clearly under pressure. So the work she's doing there is so valuable on this topic today. But before we get into that interview, let's dive into Landscape Pulse. Okay, so now onto Landscape Pulse, and this is where we're going to dive into today's topic, and Robin and I are going to discuss it a little bit. So I want to start with a question for you, Robin, which is a bit of a change up that we do in this. When you think back to the beginning of your career or earlier on,
Mhm.
do you think that you're actually busier today? And do you think everyone's busier today than they were back then?
Hmm. I That's a good question. I don't think we're busier. I think maybe more overwhelmed because we're processing a lot more information. We have a lot more kind of coming at us. I don't know about busier per se. I think, previously we had meetings or just a couple different ways of communicating in the workplace life. Now we have meetings, we have emails, we have Teams, we have project management tools, we have Slack, we have texts, we have DMs, we have project management, we have my Apple Watch that bings at me sometimes in the middle of
Mhm.
this when I forget to turn my notifications off.
Yeah.
And that all fights for your attention at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's really interesting is that we can often tend to measure success or productivity based on how much we can throw at somebody and see what they can handle, which, I think is a really interesting way or place that we've got into. And what's even more interesting is that we're developing technology at a really rapid pace to help people with productivity and, the introduction of AI and all of these things are evolving and moving really quickly. But I also am questioning, you know, does human capacity, are we able to evolve at the same pace as this technology's evolving at that's supposed to be able to help us? Because we still need that time to disconnect. And it feels like the more things that come out, the less time we have for disconnecting to sort of take a beat, take a breath, and just think and reconnect.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's this really strange kind of contradiction that's happening, especially in the workplace, because organizations have invested, billions of dollars into all of these different productivity tools. Yet it seems like burnout, stress, feeling overwhelmed is growing and getting more and more prevalent rather than less prevalent or shrinking.
Hmm. And it raises a really interesting question around maybe the challenge isn't about productivity and instead about capacity. And we've become really great at evolving operating systems and technology, but maybe we haven't been the best at thinking about the people behind it and how we're evolving them to go alongside it.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why I'm excited to have this conversation and why I think it's so important that we're bringing this conversation into the podcast with Jamila is because she's going to be able to shed a lot of light on the situation, especially when it comes to the topic of cognitive capacity and executive functioning. And hopefully, she's going to be able to give us some resources and some tips and tricks on how to navigate it. And I'm really excited to hear what she has to say.
Yeah, I think we should bring her in for an interview. Great. Hi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We're so excited to have you here and to have this conversation. I think that it's so important. And you've had a really fascinating career journey, and I can't wait to get into that. But you've spent more than 20 years working in marketing and learning about workforce development, including senior leadership roles within large organizations, helping teams navigate change, disruption, and growth. Today, you're the founder of Village of Play, where you focus on helping professionals strengthen cognitive capacity, executive function, and their ability to think clearly under pressure. What's particularly interesting is that your work doesn't just come from theory or research, it comes from a combination of corporate leadership experience, personal experience, and years of working alongside experts across education, healthcare, mental health, and business. So, I want to dive into so many parts of that. But why don't you take us back a bit and tell us about your journey and how you got to open Village of Play and what happened behind the scenes there?
Well, starters, thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. In terms of my career, you nailed it. I spent the better part of 20 years working in the corporate sector. When I start, even before that, I was in the service industry. So I did a lot of work in customer service. I worked in restaurants for a period of time. And then I landed my first really big corporate gig working for Mattel, the toy company. And it came at such an opportune time because, as you guys know as well, marketing is one of those industries where you just have to jump in 2 feet into the deep end and kind of figure out your way on the way there. And it was during Barbie's 50th birthday. So
Mm.
that was one of the first marketing campaigns I had an opportunity to work on. And it was so much fun. And then I moved over into media after a period of time, and I worked for Chorus Entertainment, and I was in their children's arm division called Nelvana. So I was a global brand manager there for about 5 years. And then I rounded out the end of my career working about 10, 11 years at GE Appliances Canada. So just to echo, a lot of it was brand marketing. And then it started to migrate into training when I started to have to train on new product launches, stuff like that. My bosses and leaders were like, kind of have a flavor for training. Like, this is something that would interest you. And I always wanted to teach.
Mm.
So I think that's why I really love what I did in those later parts of my career. So my whole career has really been people and performance, really at the end of the day. And I think, what got me here with Village of Play is a combination of three things. Number one, my corporate background and just being a fly on the wall, not even including myself, watching people hit these walls, not because they didn't care, not because they didn't have the skill, but there was something deeper that was going on. And then when it started to happen to me, hindsight being what it was, I started to learn, okay, you know what? Executive functioning skills, and I know we'll get to it later because it came by way through my son, is something that affects every single solitary one of us. And they were the skills that none of us were ever taught. So I wanted to not only support professionals as well, but as well as kids that are growing up today that don't have that support. And that's why we call it a village, right?
Mhm.
And I'm very passionate about education, and I think there's more than one way to educate. And we know that research shows that play and movement is the best way for our brains to learn. So if I thought if I'm going to go on this journey teaching brain fitness, let's make it fun at the same time.
That's amazing, and so interesting, that path that you took. Can you tell me a little bit more about the work that you do with professionals and, what type of work that you do with them in that area?
Yeah, so what I really took was my skill base of corporate training. So, in those later years, with GE, I had to teach on home appliances, which isn't super sexy, or super fun. So you really have to find ways to make that learning fun because as a corporate trainer facilitator, that's your major key performance indicator is how engaged is your learner, what their retention is, how much are they learning. So we really had to learn to make that kind of thing fun. So that's what we do in the corporate spaces now as well. because we know that capacity is really becoming an issue for professionals. We're seeing burnout rates skyrocket, stress leaves skyrocket, and organizations are hemorrhaging money just seeing people go on medical leaves that you still gotta pay their compensation, you still have to pay benefits, and then there's a loss in productivity during that time as well, and that pressure just compiles. So what we do with organizations now is there's a few different things. We kind of assess team cohesion and what's going on and really help people and professionals understand that what we sometimes think might be a personality clash could have more to do with an underlying executive functioning gap that we didn't know was there. And I say that carefully
Mhm.
because it doesn't excuse poor behavior. Accountability is still critical, but we were never taught any of these skills. So we do corporate training workshops, pilots, anything like that, webinars to support upskilling, anything, new technologies, transitions, organizational change. Because when that happens and capacity thins out and the pressure gets high, your executive functioning skills are the first things to go offline, that higher order thinking.
Wow. It's so important in everything we do all the time.
hmm
Um, I'm also really interested to know, was there a specific moment along this journey that you realized that this was more than an interesting topic for you, but something that you really wanted to move your career into?
Yeah, I would say it dates back probably 6 or 7 years ago now. So it was call it the holy trinity of crossroads in life. When COVID happened, I lost both my parents in very short succession. We lost my mom in July 2019, and then we lost my dad 17 months later to COVID in 2020, just a few days before Christmas. And during that, it was a scary time for everybody already. We're working from home remotely. My son was 6 and now he's on a computer, and he spent 2.5 years, as a lot of our kids did, sitting behind a computer. And during that time, he was also diagnosed with ADHD. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't have language. I didn't have resources. I didn't know where to start. And again, hindsight being what it is now,
Mhm.
the first thing the pediatrician told us, which was the best advice that she gave, is that it had more to do with educating us as parents than anything to do with fixing him. And
Great.
it
That's a great thing to
yeah,
acknowledge and to make sure that, people understand that it really is about that.
absolutely. And so she sent me on this journey of learning all about ADHD, and it started with understanding what executive functioning skills actually are. So I think between processing my own grief, which again, when pressure and capacity and bandwidth don't exist anymore, you're dealing with unprocessed grief or relationship dynamics or something scary like COVID. And in addition to life, right? All these different waves of life that start to happen. That's really what put me on this trajectory because I started thinking, well, hold on a second. Executive functioning skills aren't just ADHD. They're you, they're me, they're every single one of us. And they were not anything we were taught in school. And they likely should have been,
Yeah.
knowing what we know today, which is why we're starting to see it come into school. But there is still that gap. And now, there's been no generation before this one that has started being taught those skills with intention and attention. So there's a lot of ground to make up because every generation, us, our parents, our brothers and sisters didn't have that benefit of learning what they are and are really struggling with their capacity as they get older.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, what's really interesting about that, and while it was such a difficult time for you personally, sometimes it's in those most difficult times that you come out the other side and you had this big sort of monumental shift in how you could approach career training and helping people and
Mhm.
educating. So, there is that upside that happened there.
I think so. I think that's sometimes, when they say you have to go through the fire to come out the other side. I don't regret having gone through what we went through in order to get there. I'm glad I was able to connect the dots
Yeah.
because I think that is the critical part is sometimes we get on the other side and think, okay, I made it through until the next wave hits and then the next one and then the next one. And so I thought, you know what, at the time when this happened to me, because I ended up on a medical leave myself, and I really struggled with it. I was put on a doctor ordered medical leave. There were some issues with my heart. And at the time, I thought I was just an anecdote or I wasn't trying hard enough. or maybe it's just me.
Mm.
Maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe I should have done this. We all do that. That's
Yeah.
just the narrative we play. And so when I came out of that, I thought, you know what? I know I'm not the only one. And the more people you talk to, the more you hold space to allow people to share those vulnerabilities, the more you hear, okay, you know what? It's not just me. So if I can help other people a little earlier on in the journey than I kind of discovered myself, then hopefully it saves a few more people from having to go on a stress leave.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's great. And I think you're right in that like what you're talking about in that approach is so needed today.
Yeah.
And I find it really interesting when I hear about your story. You've seen different organizations from various different aspects, which means that you've seen the professionals that you work with from various different aspects, in terms of leaders as well as, the employees that they lead. And I'd like to maybe ask, across all of those experiences, and you talk about hindsight as well, and now you have this sort of newfound knowledge in the new work that you do today. What are some of those common challenges that you see that people are constantly struggling with in the workplace?
It's a pattern that I see consistently. And I think one of the identifiers is that you see it from the bottom to the top of an organization. It's that people are not focused in a very fragmented world. We live in a fragmented world that's meant to divide our attention span, right? From smartphones to everything that we have right now. So the inability to focus, reacting in ways that are more triggering, that almost surprise you, versus taking the thoughtfulness and the time to sit with the thought and respond appropriately. We see the narrowing of ideas. And you see that in organizations just as much as we see it publicly right now. Turn on a news, anchor station and watch people fight and argue. I can't watch the news anymore because of it,
Yeah,
because they're not
that's true.
listening to each other. They're screaming and yelling over each other. And I thought, well, it's very rigid thinking. And you see that consistently happen because, again, when the pressure is on, your thinking gets very narrow, right? And that's where it becomes critical on the decisions that you make. Are they high quality? And are they the right decisions for the organization? And I think as capacity is depleting, we're seeing that happen more and more frequently where they're not great decisions that are being made.
Mhm. I think, what's interesting about that is when people hear about some of these challenges, it's often assumed that that's a skill problem, right? Is it they need better time management? Do they need better productivity tools or better processes? And what you're doing seems to suggest that there's something deeper happening, a cognitive capacity issue. It's a term many people may not be familiar with, but it sits at the center of the work that you do today. When you say cognitive capacity, what do you mean and why is it becoming such an important topic in today's workplace?
So, cognitive capacity at its root, it's just the mental bandwidth that you have in order to operate and complete or execute your day to day life operationally. And that could be in the work or in the home or in a mix of two,
Okay.
right? So, if you think of the mental bandwidth you have to regulate your emotions every day in and day out, to make good decisions and follow through on those decisions, to think clearly and be able to pivot even when things get hard, because we tend to get very rigid when life starts to feel hard. So if you think of your entire life like a cup that's full of water, okay? Every little thing and demand in life is going to deplete from that cup a little bit. So if you think of work pressure, we're all parents, we're all women who've raised children as well. New baby, guess what? That
Mhm.
sleep deprivation little comes
Mhm.
out of the cup,
Mhm.
right? It could be work pressure, a little bit more depletes out of the cup. It could be an aging parent, unprocessed grief, right? You've got a pandemic on your hands. You've got upskilling. You've got a new promotion where you're now responsible for more people. All of that starts to add up, right? And it starts to deplete that mental bandwidth that we have because we've never been taught how to restoratively recover and slow down. It's just do more with less, do more,
Right.
power through.
Yeah.
And I remember it was always an ongoing joke with the team that I used to work on. We had Dory, the little fish, remember from
Mhm.
Finding Nemo?
Yeah.
And that was always the
Just
signature was just keep swimming,
yeah.
just keep swimming. Yeah, until you can't anymore. Yeah, right. And that's what we really see that's starting to happen with full force, especially as we're upskilling with AI, because it's no longer about the technology, is the cognitive capacity sustainably of the people that are using the tools.
Yeah.
Um, with that in mind, Rob and I both lead teams of people, and I'm just wondering for anyone else who leads teams out there, can you maybe expand on why we should really care about this idea of cognitive capacity with the teams and the people that we lead and why it's so important?
Absolutely. For a couple of reasons. I think number one, it's really the cost to an organization in terms of how much we bleed
Mm.
systemically, addressing a problem reactively, like cognitive capacity or even mental health broadly for that, from that standpoint. We have wellness apps and mindfulness apps, and we have the benefit programs where you can get, yoga or therapy or stuff like that. But it's all very reactive in its nature. And
Right.
when it becomes reactive like that, there's always an additional cost associated with that. So if I go back to even my own leave of absence, I had a six-figure salary, so they still had to pay me while I was on my leave, and I was not the first person. I had been, I think, the fourth out of five people, over a period, of a couple of years. So you think of the cost of consistently having to remunerate people for being on their leaves of absences, maintain their benefits, their pensions, everything like that. The cost is actually a lot more minimal investing in human capacity trainings like ours
Right.
and the loss of productivity that comes with that, especially if you're in a position where you oversee people, because now they've lost that person too,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So the entire productivity train, it's not just going to keep going. It's kind of a, three steps forward, two steps back every single time. So I think that's a big part of it. The other big part of it, why leaders need to care, I think, is also because we have to be aware, and I include myself in this. I'm not standing on my own soapbox saying this. We have to be aware of our own capacity as leaders.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that erodes as we start to be mindful and have to be responsible for other people. We've been in leadership trainings, all of us, where we were told, listen, you bring the weather, you are the thermostat of the room.
Mm-hmm.
All the while, we're not paying attention to how much we're depleting over time. And I think you both really articulated it very well. I think it was in your first episode where you said the importance of having boundaries. It's already very challenging for that, I think, as women in certain spaces, especially in business. And for me personally, being a woman of color, that boundary was always a little blurrier for me, because of the way there was an expectation in which I had to show up. So I think that emotional and psychological safety in the workplace starts with being able to hold space with intention
Mm-hmm.
for training like executive functioning, because it does lead to better outcomes like how we collaborate, right? People are not going to collaborate and they're not going to share ideas when they don't feel emotionally safe to,
That's a good point.
or if they're
Yeah.
or if they feel too depleted to.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. Cognitive flexibility out of the 9 is my favorite skill because it is your ability to take the perspective of another. And it's okay. It's okay to disagree and still leave with your dignity intact.
Mhm.
And right now our world is not safe in which to do that for so many people, whether that's just being flies on the wall to see what's happening down in the United States or, being in our own environments. It can be a very um, you know, uh conflicting world right now.
Mhm.
And your ability to pivot and adapt and to uncertainty and change and roll with it. We're not talking about just having an easygoing personality. It's a real critical skill that you need. And those are the people that are investing in AI. If they invest in that too, I think they're going to be the ones to come out and win because they're paying attention to the human element that needs to stay at the center.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think
Mhm.
that's all very good points. I think, I never thought about it in that way that you articulated it in terms of, when it came to a point in my life where I had to set boundaries, it was reactive.
Mhm.
Right. And by doing so, though, it allowed me to then take a step back, get myself into a better place where I could be a better leader, be a better team contributor, be more productive, all of those things.
Yeah, and I think it's a balance, I think, like anything. I'm very much I don't like the pendulum swinging too far left or too far right, because we always find that we kind of have to come back to center at some point. And I think it's exactly that. The things that we have said that surprise us in a state of dysregulation to our partners, to our children, to our staff, to ourselves, the noise we say internally, all from a dysregulated mindset, and it's kind of funny because when I do my workshops, usually the first question I ask is, show of hands, how many of you were taught by your parents at the age of 10 how to regulate your emotions? That's usually the reaction that we get. And what that does is it does two things. It recognizes that we have more in common than we think when it comes to this, because none of us were taught, right? And then we develop these coping mechanisms and we white knuckle it through life, right? Until it can no longer sustain us, because as every new generation starts to get older and you have a new transition or milestone in life, I don't know about you guys, but like in the early part when I was at Mattel, I was a go-getter. I was ambitious and I had the drive for results. I didn't have a partner yet. I didn't have somebody else I was responsible. I wasn't a parent yet. And then I became a parent and I had to make those adjustments.
Yeah.
Right. And then I lost my parents. So then I lost my village. And now it's like, okay, I got to do this on my own now. So all of those waves that hit us in life, they're going to come. It doesn't matter. I think what the difference is, and what we're trying to teach with executive functioning right now, is the difference becomes, are you going to tread water and just try to keep your head above float for every wave that hits you, because those waves will never stop? Or can we empower you with the skills so that you can roll on your back and float out and just roll out that wave and let it pass,
Yeah. I think, you talked a lot about the concept of people feeling busy a lot and not necessarily feeling productive.
Yes.
And I think that's a common theme that I see sometimes. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about why you think that happens.
Definitely. And I think there's something that's happened where we've kind of confused being busy with being productive. Busy is volume. How many meetings do you have in the calendar today? How many items do you have on the task list that you can check off? Because we all love that feeling when we check something off the checklist, right? But productivity is impact, right? And I think we have to really kind of take that step back sometimes and look at how we're prioritizing, because we're in a space right now where everything is urgent and everything is a crisis and everything has to get done right now. And I think some of that has stemmed out of the boundaries that have gotten muddy in terms of our work and our personal lives. I was always that person who's like, leave your stuff at home. When you come to work, you're here to work. You got to kind of shut it out. It's almost impossible to do that today.
Yeah.
Whether it's because you have your phone buzzing in your pocket, generations before, when you left the office, you left work at the office too, and that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that busyness is just compounding day after day now.
It feels like we measure success sometimes too on the checklist and the busyness level, right? If you're busy and you're getting a lot of things checked off, that equals a measurement of success in some ways.
I think so. Well, we're a very performance driven culture too, whether that's North America or just the Western Hemisphere in general. And I think that's also part of why we call it a village as well, is half the battle is also the journey. And we have a village to support us so that because we're not meant to do this alone. We're wired for connection. We're wired to ask people for help and support, and we don't do that anymore. Right. And I think you've mentioned that very well in that the measure of your worth or your value comes in how much you can output.
Yeah.
Right. Even if the impact of that value isn't as high as it probably could be. When we read about CEOs, one of the biggest measures they do is they have a very short window of time where they make high quality and a small amount of decisions in a given day. It could only be like one or two decisions for that entire day, but it's strategic because it's more impactful versus getting caught up in the busyness.
Yeah, definitely. I also feel or think that people feel like they're a lot more overwhelmed today than they were in previous generations. I don't know if that's reality or if it just feels that way.
I think It's a mix of both,
Mm.
right? And I say this part carefully because I think every generation feels like theirs is the hardest. I'm a Generation X kid. So, some of these skills that I had to learn, or executive functioning in general, we had to learn because there was no other way in which to learn them. You had to learn them out of being resourceful. My mom was a nurse and my dad worked shift work. My parents were not around. So you had to learn how to regulate yourself if you got made fun of on the playground. You didn't have mom and dad always run home to and help you sort through your feelings about it, right? So I think every generation has had their version of hard. I do think there are differences now. And like I mentioned earlier, we had structural boundaries in place when it came to work. But I think after COVID,
Yeah.
we've now got remote work or we've got work from home. It is getting tougher to put some of those boundaries in place. And some of those, I think we just don't have the communication skills in which to do that anymore. Because, sometimes I hear, boundaries and I think safety, like physical safety,
Right.
right? And, we're as women taught those boundaries when to say no, right? When it's something, to do with our physical safety. So I'm careful with that now because I think it's now about learning how to communicate with your boss in a collaborative way to establish those boundaries, even if it's to do an exercise on the whiteboard to say, okay, what has to come off the plate so that I can finish something that might be of more urgency.
Yeah.
And your leader will know that. And I think it's a two-way street in terms of that communication, but that can't be had if both people's capacities are zapped, right? Because the first things that disappear is cognitive flexibility because you're rigid, your thinking gets more rigid and narrow, and then you end up clinging to plans even though they no longer serve you because it makes your brain feel safe, right? And then coming from a dysregulated mindset, if your boss is irritable with you or snapping with you or vice versa, you're not going to feel safe to speak up, right? So
So, yeah, to build on that a little bit. So, oftentimes somebody won't ask for the help or they'll be sort of, at those end stages. And then it's hard to really articulate and think clearly and have that understanding. Um, you know, are there the early signs that we can sort of see in people that are leading to that burnout point that, we can sort of help guide or direct, in ways that we can sort of see it before or as it's coming?
I think you can, the signs are there earlier on, I think, than we think. They're not a giant red flag. They might be little things. And I'll use my own experience as an example because now I can go back. I have the benefit to go back and be like, oh, okay, this was coming and I didn't know why at the time. So it could be the person who was very, very organized at one point that now you can kind of see they're a little more disorganized in their thoughts, right? It could be that, they are a little more abrupt or curt or, the tone changes when they were maybe usually fairly easygoing person. You can see that just that little bit of a shift and they just don't have as much tolerance or patience, but then they might feel badly about it afterwards. Right. Or they're like, I don't know where that really came from. So those are some of the tiny little signs you start to see that, or maybe that they're spending more time on a project that maybe is of lower importance rather than on the complex ones, right? Because it takes a heavier cognitive load,
Right.
and you need more capacity to do that, right? Meanwhile, you could have that conversation like, well, why did you spend, 20 minutes on this content calendar when it didn't need and to be worked on anymore? Why aren't you doing the strategic forecasting plan? It takes more cognitive load to do that.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that's the hardest one to really discern for a leader as well, because on the other side of it, again, I don't ever like to answer the question wholly because I don't want to lose the accountability of poor behavior. But you do see the shift. Somebody who's checked out, they don't care. They don't, you often see they're like, okay, they could take it or leave it. They're not really engaged or kind of checked out. The person that is still showing up, that is really hard on themselves, right? The one that is really struggling, they're over explaining, you see some more dysregulation happening in them. I think there's more of an executive functioning gap that is underlying it than there is a personality clash, or they're not a team player anymore, because everybody has their limits. And ultimately, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. As you say that, I'm like, oh, I've seen this happen. And, I haven't really thought that through until you were talking about it, though, which is incredibly interesting. You've talked a bit about executive functioning, and I think for a lot of us, that's a term that's used frequently when we talk about ADHD, but it really does impact everybody in the workplace. Can you explain why executive functioning is important to everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at executive functioning at its root, they are the mental skills that serve as, call it your air traffic controller of the front part of your brain, all your higher order thinking. And it takes about 25 years for those skills to develop, which is why, before the age of 12, in Canada anyway, kids aren't deemed to be able to commit a crime because they don't know right from wrong yet. That's higher order thinking, right? Why we can't get a driver's license till we're 16, why you can't drink till a certain age, because that higher order thinking isn't built yet. So, and these are all the skills that are completely responsible for how you navigate your day-to-day life, and there's 9 of them.
Okay.
So there's impulse control, emotional regulation, your working memory, which is just learning information and using it at the same time, organization, task initiation, cognitive flexibility, goal-directed persistence. All of these skills, planning and prioritization, all of these are the really great skills that turn intention into action. And we were never taught them in school.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I think that because we were never taught them deliberately, it also lowers the shame the more we can talk about it. So, that icebreaker joke that I told you about, the collective relief you feel in the room, because it's nothing to be ashamed of. None of us got the manual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I often say, do you ever feel like there's this black curtain and everybody's got the keys to life on the other side of it? And you're like, where are the keys? I didn't get them. I think a lot of it has to do with executive functioning. And it has been relegated either to higher levels of academia until now, or therapy, right?
Right.
In the benefit of like mainstream school and mainstream corporate Canada, it's never existed. Not really until you get to a leadership level. And then suddenly all of it comes out, because then we learn about emotional intelligence and resilience and how to be a people leader. So again, I said I wanted to bring it back into the village. And I've had the benefit in my private life, which not a lot of people know. I was a mentor for youth a lot growing up. So I was a big sister. I used to do mentorship programs at the Calgary Young Offender Center. And so many kids landed in there that just didn't need it. And then it's because they didn't have a village, you know? So I said there had to be more than school, therapy, or jail. And I think that's where a village comes in to support you, is to support each other when it comes to mental health proactively. Because I think we might see some of this stuff start to dissipate. Not everything, because we have neurological issues, we have heavy mental health concerns. But I'm really big on cognitive fitness training as a daily part of your life. You wouldn't run a marathon without training your body.
Yeah.
We
Train
run a
our brain.
marathon of life every day, and we don't treat our brain with the same love and care that it needs to be.
Yeah, 100%. I think those are all really important and really great skills that, people should know and should learn, definitely. And it would definitely, I think, help and impact people in the workplace, especially if they understood them. Are there certain of those executive functioning skills that most or many adults or more adults kind of struggle with? Like, is there ones that are harder
I
to
would
master, so to speak?
I would say as an adult, the hardest ones that I've seen in the corporate space, especially emotional regulation, is a really big one. Um, and I mean, you could turn on any social media video today and watch two people road raging out on each other on the highway. Neither person are regulated. And I mean, they may not do that in their everyday capacity of their life, but it was something in there in those moments. So emotional regulation, I do find, is a really difficult one, especially when you're navigating higher pressures in life, whether that's work or family or in between, sleep deprivation, all those things. I would say that cognitive flexibility, right? Because as that pressure goes up, your ability to take in other ideas and then use that discernment and have a safe space in which to disagree with each other erodes, and we get very binary in our thinking. Our brains kind of work. It's a bit of an irony when it comes to executive functioning, because as the pressure mounts, which is right when we need all those great skills, those are the ones that goes off. They go offline, right?
Mhm.
Right. And then I would say the third one is task initiation. Because task initiation is your ability to just begin the task.
Mm.
So if you hear people saying, "Oh, I procrastinate and I put this off," it's not about laziness. It's your brain's measurement of what feels safe and what doesn't
Mm.
right now. Your brain has one job to do, which is to keep you safe.
Yeah.
And in doing that, it's also inherently lazy. So it looks for the easiest out, right?
Yeah.
And so it's easier to get reactive. It's easier to shut out your ideas. It's easier not to do the task. And those are the ones I think we struggle with as adults the most today.
So do you think a lot of performance issues in the workplace then are these cognitive uh, capacity or these executive functioning skills, um, like people's inability to understand them or see them kind of in disguise? And then is there a difference in terms of when you see these high performers or people who, make their way up to executive level of CEO, like are they the ones who typically have a better handle in those spaces?
Yeah. So to answer the first part, again, I would preface to say that not every situation is going to be executive functioning gaps at play. Um, again, there are true performance challenges. There are behavioral issues or cultural issues. So I don't ever want to negate poor behavior, but at the same time, I think it happens more often than we know,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And again, I think because we were never taught them with any intention, we weren't taught executive functioning skills the way we were taught bed mass in
Mhm.
math,
Yeah.
right?
You all still recall bed mass.
That's what I mean. I can still tell you what that is.
Do I use it
still know how to
today?
use
No.
it? No, of course I don't. But we were taught that with more intention than we were how to regulate when, stuff went sideways.
Right.
And it's when you think about it now,
Yeah.
you're like, why weren't
Why?
we?
Yeah.
Because they were just considered life skills. And, there was an expectation that, again, you didn't have to be taught it. You would just learn through the seat of your pants. And that's it. So I think that on the second part, when it comes to high performers, those that don't flame out and that do end up sustaining, what we see in terms of patterns are particularly high self-monitoring, right? A self-monitoring and emotional regulation.
Okay.
So self-monitoring is just the ability to see yourself in real time and recognize or do a check-in of, well, what do I need? What boundary do I need to have in place? Right. And that's what you guys said, very well in that first episode, was having boundaries. And self-monitoring, especially with high performers, they have a really great ability to do that. And that self-monitoring is also the hardest part of being able to look yourself in the mirror and saying, maybe I got some work to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's okay to be able to humble yourself. It's our first time being a human on this journey, right? And the more grace you can give yourself on that learning process or that pathway, the more regulated you are as well, because then you're not as hard on yourself either. So I think those are the two of the most critical skills that high performers who sustain the long term are really, really strong in.
I think what's incredibly interesting too is, as you're talking about, we're not trained necessarily on these skills, that we're trained in so many other technical ways, on bed mass or whatever it is that stays with us. But at the same time, if, at our core, we're trained on this over from a young age and it becomes part of our system and our process of how to deal with things, when we see that burnout happening or the cup emptying, it doesn't come naturally, the skills, because we haven't been taught them.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest part. I always go back to kids. We learn so much from our kids, right? And I think we all kind of share that as mothers too. There's so much I'm learning from my son
Yeah.
and the grace he gives himself that I never gave myself. We get into this, whether it's a perfectionist mindset or a people-pleasing mindset or a high performance mindset, whatever you want to call it. But I bear witness to my son, and he's like, I don't know it yet, but I'll get there. and I wish I had that kind of,
What a great
yeah, you know what I mean? I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, kid, you're gonna
That grace.
you're gonna be okay. Yeah, and I think that's part of it is being able to give ourselves the grace that we didn't learn it,
Yeah.
be able to teach it to our kids, and that was really important for me as well because it helped me understand where my gaps were, so that I could really authentically show up for my son as the mother I wanted to be, not the one I was reacting to because I didn't have the language or I didn't have the tools or I didn't recognize my own depletion when it was happening in real time.
Right.
And I think that's been the beautiful full circle moment now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. Um, I'm flipping it back to sort of corporate organizations. And this is an interesting question, but is there something that's common across the organizations that you work with, that you believe, that companies believe that they're doing to help employees, but is actually potentially making things worse?
The wellness afterthought.
Okay. Yeah.
So like we were saying before, having that mindfulness app or, the poster on the wall, I think the intentions are there, but it doesn't address the cognitive load itself,
Hmm.
right? And it doesn't change the workload. It still exists.
Yeah.
So if we talk about it in a metaphor of a hurricane, right? So the hurricane is gonna go. It's always gonna go all the time, and you can't do anything to stop it. The only thing you can learn to do is become an eye in your own storm. And I think organizations are not looking at that proactively enough. I think the intentions are there in order to address it after the fact. But what I do think it sometimes signals is that you are still the problem. So here's the mindfulness app, or here's the book.
Okay.
Now go ahead and make it better. But you can't productivity hack your way out of a capacity issue, right?
Mhm.
You have to learn restorative mental health care as a regular and everyday practice. So you can't build self-monitoring if you're too busy to stop and just say, what do I need today?
Yeah.
What energy am I coming in with today? What do I need to protect today? Right? So in our home, we go by something we call the rule of 5. And when it comes to emotional regulation. So before you're cleared to take off on anybody, and we do this at the village as well, you have a responsibility to ask yourself 5 things. How did I sleep last night? Because sleep deprivation will show up the next day in ways that you don't want it to. Have I had anything to eat or drink today? Because hangry is a real thing. Dehydration is a real thing. Have I moved my body today? Right? We know that when the body moves, the brain will follow. Then that's pure physiology. You cannot analyze yourself out of a dysregulated mind. So you have to move your body. And we're not talking running 5 miles, but at least get your body in motion,
Right.
because it will clear your brain. Warren Buffett he talked very openly about this with his team, and they would go on walking meetings because it was a really great
love
way to
walking
prime the
meetings.
brain and get it moving. Have you been outside in nature? Even if just to take your shoes off and just plant your feet on the ground, it's got a very grounding effect for your parasympathetic nervous system. And then number 5 is, have you connected with someone that you like, love, or respect? Because we're social creatures. We need each other, even the introverts. It's the how much time you spend might look different, but we are all wired for human connection. And if you don't have a human, then go to your local pet shelter and hang out with the animals. But it is really good food for the soul. So that's what we look at, and we carry that even into organizations today. That's the beginning of self-monitoring, and 9 times out of 10, we don't even look at those things.
Yeah.
Right?
So I like that. I'm gonna steal that and start using it. So thank you.
Breathe.
So producer Meg has been giving me the one more question. We're almost out of time.
No problem.
So I'm gonna get to our last question, even though I think we could sit here and talk about this for a lot longer. We are in a world with a lot of tools and technology. There's more tech, more AI, but I think, what we're uncovering through this conversation is one of the biggest workplace challenges of the next decade isn't necessarily technology, but it sounds like it's more about human capacity. And so I'd love to, end on more of an optimistic note of like, what gives you optimism that we are going to get this right?
I think because all of these skills are learnable.
Mm.
The best part that we know about brain health and brain science today is neuroplasticity, in that you can learn a skill from the day you're born until the day you pass. The only two things that change as we get older in our brains is our processing speed, which does slow down a little bit as you age. It might just take you a little bit longer, but you'll still get there. And cognitive flexibility, which is what that most important skill, because your brain gets more and more rigid the older it gets because it's shaped by your world experiences. So this is where I think we could take a really great lesson from kids who are kind of little scientists, and they're always very curious about their world and asking why. Why is the sky blue? Why do you have a mustache? But we don't condemn it. We don't judge it. It's curious.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most optimistic part that I have, is that every single one of these skills are learnable and we can train them. We have language, we have tools, we have resources, we have support, in ways that we can teach this with intention from a mainstream standpoint in ways we never were able to before. And I think the best part is that that is something that no amount of AI will ever be able to replicate. Because those deeply human skills that we're talking about, those 9 executive functioning skills, those are the ones that are able to discern and make good judgment. Those are the ones that are able to hold space when somebody else is struggling, right? Those are the ones that are able to read a room and be able to pivot and adapt. And that's not something AI can ever do.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's really critical that we focus on that. And as long as we are, I think the sky's the limit, because it really brings us back to an ability to collaborate, to critically think, and really blow the ceiling off of what is possible with the unique minds that we have, that had just been getting lost in the busyness
Yeah.
of life right now.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's absolutely incredible. And you've definitely given me so much to think about and reflect on personally as well. I feel like I've got takeaways and I'm going to take notes on some of this as I watch back. But thank you so much for joining us today. What a great conversation. And I think so valuable for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you
Definitely.
for having me.
I think our audience will have a lot of questions, comments, things that they will want to know more and learn about. So
Absolutely.
I would say that they can probably reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we're on LinkedIn. You can find our website at villageplay.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook. We're in all the places.
Amazing.
So, and it's a great journey.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and on to our final segment, hot takes and headaches. And this is where our producer, Meg, will rapid fire some questions for us. Take it away, Meg.
Okay. First question. Kelly, we'll start with you. What is one practice or boundary you enforce to keep yourself from burning out?
My disconnecting time is around working out, specifically being a runner. That's the time that I love to have for myself, that I feel like I do really unplug, just spend some time with my thoughts, the ability to think things through. And I always come out of a run with a different perspective or a new idea on things. So I'd say that's really my time that I do that.
Robin?
For me, once I had children, it was really grounded and founded around the quality time with my kids. And so, sometimes that looks like protecting my weekends. Sometimes that looks like protecting evenings, depending on, what's going on in life. And it's really important to me that I can spend the quality time with my children and turn work off and turn those notifications off and know that I am present for them.
I think those are two really great boundaries. Okay, on the flip side, Robin, if you have experienced burnout before, big or small, what was one thing you felt contributed to that, and how have you sort of changed that now?
I wouldn't say that I've necessarily gotten to the point of burnout. I've been close though in taking on too much, and definitely not listening to some of those warning signals that Jamila talks about in the podcast earlier, and just ignoring them and just kept swimming, so to speak. So I think, I learned a lot from that, though, in terms of getting to a place of knowing that I was no longer being productive, no longer being, a good parent, no longer being a good partner to my husband, and no longer being kind to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took a pause and learned that I need to put those boundaries in place and also find some time for self-care. And for me, that is movement and exercise and going for walks and, just finding moments where I can be also alone and quiet.
Yeah.
hmm
Kelly?
Yeah, I think, I have a habit of, I think a lot of people do, that you say yes to everything and just continue to take on more and more and more until it feels really overwhelming. I'd say that I've gotten better at understanding how much I can take on
Yeah.
and when to ask for help and, potentially say no to things. I still struggle with that, but it's important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It is hard to say no. Um, okay. What is one thing, Kelly, that you wish you knew about your own working style earlier on in your career?
Yeah, I think I can get really easily distracted from jumping around task to task. And I learned how to compartmentalize better and allocate my working time more efficiently and effectively. And I don't know without the experience if I would have been able to figure that out right off the bat. But for me, it really was about understanding what I could get done in a time period, compartmentalizing those things together and sort of organizing it that way.
Yeah. Robin?
Yeah, I think uh, a little bit of the same in terms of understanding when and where it's better for me to just head down, focus, maybe in a separate room or without distraction on certain projects, and where I need to s- work in shorter, smaller chunks. So that way I can take time for that creative brain or that creative processing to happen as well.
Yeah.
It's one thing, when you're focusing on a task that you just need to pound something out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another way of working when you need to have more sort of strategic thought that gets put into it. And the difference in the working styles that's required for those different types of outputs.
Yeah. And like learning what works best.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Kind of a more fun question here, Robin. What is one song that's guaranteed to put you in a better mood?
I would say anything 90s hip hop definitely puts me in a good mood.
All right. Kelly?
I don't have a definite answer on that. On a one song, I have a playlist for everything, so I'm just gonna say I'm all over the place.
Okay.
hmm
Okay. Final question here. What, Kelly, was one thing you enjoyed doing as a child that you still enjoy doing today?
Oh, I'm gonna say I'm going back to another question we talked about. I'm a runner, any type of sports. I've always been a sports girly, so still enjoy it to this day that I enjoyed as a kid.
Mm-hmm. Robin?
I love board games.
Oh,
I am a board game person. I love like card games, board games, anything like that. I tried to get my family on board with this so we could do, and we did
Like
through
a
COVID.
games night?
Well, we did COVID games night.
Yeah.
But then once we got back to regular routine, it's sort of fallen off. But now that you bring that up, I might have
Bring it
to
back.
reinstate it. Yeah.
Yes. All right. That's all for the questions today.
okay. What a great conversation we had today. I think such an important lesson for anyone, no matter where they are in their life, their career, or otherwise. It's incredible.
Agree. I think there's a lot of really good takeaways. I'm going to start to think more about my executive functions and cognitive capacity after today for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
And until next time, I'm Robin LeGassicke.
And I'm Kelly Miller.
And that's a wrap.